So we're watching a situation that continues to unfold tonight in Oroville, California, where nearly 200,000 people have been evacuated around the nation's tallest dam. And those communities are facing the very real possibility of catastrophic flooding. Now, we spent some time on the show on Friday night trying to wrap our heads around the scale of that dam and the scale of the problem at that dam. It was our lead story on Friday night's show, but over the weekend it became a crisis of much greater proportions. Again, we're talking about a lot of people being evacuated, 188,000 people. The evacuation order came suddenly yesterday afternoon. People were told they might have only an hour to get out in time before possible failure and possibly catastrophic flooding at the site of the dam. This is the Oroville Dam in happier times. See the main body of the dam there on the right side? It's nearly 800 feet tall. It's taller than the Hoover Dam. It's the tallest dam in the country. It was built in 1968, or opened in 1968. That dam created Lake Oroville, which is one of the two biggest reservoirs in California. It's absolutely central to the drinking water system of the entire state. This is the centerpiece of how more than 20 million Californians get their drinking water. Because of the crazy weather in California this winter, Lake Oroville, up at the top of that dam, is quite full. As of midnight last night, it was at 100% capacity. So they have to release some of that water. And the way they do that is by pumping water down this concrete spillway. So it flows, nicely and calmly into the Feather River below, eventually into the Sacramento River, out into the San Francisco Bay. But last week, the water coming down that spillway started looking crazy, right? It's shooting up and sideways and these churning plumes, and the water looked really dirty. It's not supposed to look like this. When they shut off the water to get a look at what was wrong, they discovered this massive sinkhole in the spillway, and it was growing. How big is this hole in the spillway? It's this big. That's people. Those little yellow specks there are people inspecting the damage. But they have to keep running water down that spillway, even if the water makes that hole worse, even if the water erodes more of that spillway, because, as I said, the lake is full. Even pumping as much water as fast as they could down that damaged spillway was not enough as of this weekend. And on Saturday, for the first time in the 50-year history of that dam, they started pouring water over the dam's emergency spillway as well. And the emergency spillway isn't even really a spillway. It's just a hillside. And there you go. That hillside, even though it's supposed to be an emergency outlet for the water coming out of the lake, it did not hold up well this weekend. I think we've got a shot of what the hillside looked like before this weekend. Here's what it looked like by yesterday afternoon. Yeah. And see the lake there is on the left side. If that erosion underneath the rim of the reservoir there gets so bad that it takes out basically the wall that's the rim of the reservoir, well, then all that water is going to come down the hill. This is when the evacuation order went out this week, when they realized that erosion was that catastrophic on the emergency spillway, when they realized that sudden erosion was happening. When they realized that sudden erosion was happening to that hillside, they realized that concrete lip holding the reservoir could fail, and that could send a 30-foot wall of water rushing into downstream communities. And so when they sent out that evacuation order yesterday, they at that point thought that that could fail within 1 hour. And that was the rush on the evacuation for all those people. Now, again, looking at the overall structure, you see the dam is there on the right side. It's labeled Oroville Dam. That part of the dam, they say, is not in danger. And that's good. But it's not necessarily reassuring at this point. I mean, they keep sending huge amounts of water at high speed down the main spillway, even though it's got that giant sinkhole there, which very well could get bigger and could spread. If it spreads all the way back up the mountain to the gates of the dam, that too could be catastrophic. Meanwhile, the hole in the emergency spillway, if they need to put more water down there, that could also grow. That could undermine the concrete lip at the top of the reservoir, and that could be catastrophic. I mean, right now, officials say they have managed to pump out enough water to lower the level of the lake by a few feet. And the water's no longer coming over the emergency spillway. But more rain is forecast for the day after tomorrow. And the question is whether they can pump out enough water down the damaged spillway by the time the next storm comes. And then there's the question of how they are going to shore up and rebuild these spillways. Crews have been trying to fill in the hole in the emergency spillway. They've been trying to buttress that concrete wall on the lip of the reservoir with boulders in bags delivered by helicopter. That sounds easy. The sheriff says he doesn't know when the nearly 200,000 people who've been evacuated will be able to come back home. There's no timeline yet for when this will be safe. Just an extremely scary time for the residents of that area and for all of California, which depends on this massive piece of now very broken infrastructure for a statewide functioning water system that literally provides water to tens of millions of people. Joining us now from the Oroville Dam is Congressman John Garamendi. 150,000 of the people evacuated because of this dam are from his district. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I know these are trying times.
Well, it is, and that was a very good explanation of what's going on here. And it is still very serious. You have about 28, 29 feet of water behind that emergency spillway, and it still is in question. And so right now, all of that noise and activity behind me is to figure out how to pile enough rocks into it that it is strengthened and secure.
Congressman, do you feel like, from what you know about this infrastructure and the California Department of Water Resources and the sheriff and the other authorities that are brought to bear on this, do you feel like this crisis is being well managed, well handled? Do you have confidence in the people who are in charge of this ongoing situation?
There are several pieces to this puzzle, and let me kind of take them apart, Rachel. The issue of the emergency evacuation last night, I think, was absolutely essential. That water was continuing to pour over the top of that emergency spillway and continuing the erosion. Looking at some of that today in the light of day, yeah, it was really serious last night. Fortunately, when they were able to open the main spillway gates, they began to lower the reservoir level because the river water coming into the reservoir was about half of what they were able to expel down the main spillway. So it's stabilized. But nonetheless, so they did make the right call last night. Now the next call will be, can this thing be patched up sufficient to withstand the storms that are clearly out ahead of us, one coming up later this week and even more as we move into March and early April, which are the heavy storm times here in the state. So we've got a lot of, let's call it a tight time ahead of us. What happened before? Why did that sinkhole happen? Was there somebody that overlooked the safety of that spillway? And then there's the question about the emergency spillway not having a concrete apron on the downhill side. Why didn't that take place in the years past?
Congressman, obviously, you've got 150,000 of your constituents who are not at home tonight, people who are not knowing how long this is going to go on. It's a scary situation. It's a human health and safety situation. It's also quickly, I imagine, for many families already becoming a serious economic situation. When we look at this as an infrastructure problem, it boggles my mind to think how expensive this is going to be to get it fixed. I understand that Governor Jerry Brown has put in an initial request for an emergency declaration from the White House. Do you have any comment on that or any expectations in terms of whether or not California is going to be able to just handle this and whether families are going to be able to handle this economically?
Well, it's certainly a tremendous strain on the families. I was at one of the centers down in Woodland, about 50 miles downstream from this area, mostly kids, young families, and they're not able to work. And so these communities are clearly having a major economic loss. Can that emergency declaration that's been requested by the governor and hopefully approved by the president, would that provide some economic relief? I think the answer is probably not to the individuals, but surely there would be some additional federal money to help rebuild this system. But this is just one really startling and very tragic and quite potentially a catastrophic example of what's happened to the infrastructure across America. We've seen bridges collapse in Minnesota. We've seen them on I-5 up in Washington State. And now this reservoir, which is the linchpin of California's water system, may be inoperable in the year ahead because of the silt that has now filled the river below the powerhouse, which is the way in which water ultimately gets out of the reservoir and flows to Southern California. So there's a whole series of problems here, not only the dam safety, but also with water supply for the state of California in the coming summer.
Wow. Incredibly serious situation, a complex one.
It is.
Right in the middle of it still. Congressman John Garamendi, who represents many of the people evacuated because of the Oroville Dam. Thank you, sir. Good luck to you and your constituents. Please keep us apprised.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We'll be right back. Stay with us.